everyone, this is Theorists Part 2. So we're going to round out the last few theorists that we'll talk about today, starting with, or continuing with rather, Piaget. So I'm not going to go into super big detail about Jean Piaget because later on in the class we'll talk in more depth about Piaget, but I am going to provide a quick introduction to his theory. So Piaget's sort of overreaching theme of his theory is that children act upon objects in their environment to create knowledge. And so Piaget really believed that children are creators of their own knowledge. They are sort of designing experiments and carrying out experiments all the time, and that is where knowledge comes from. It's not like you and I when we could read a book or watch a YouTube video and gain knowledge that way. Kids really need to interact with the objects to get the knowledge. And Piaget was a stage theorist, and I'll show you a slide with his stages. So he had essentially 4 stages of child development, and the first stage was called the sensory motor period, and that was from birth to 2 years, and that's where kids are sort of interacting with objects in really basic ways, and they're starting to understand the world based on their interaction with objects and their 5 senses. And then in the pre-operational period, that's from ages 2 to 7 years, kids are able to, they still are interacting with their 5 senses, but they also can start to get symbolic reasoning, which is pretty exciting. And then during the middle childhood years, from 7 to 11 years, is stage 3, that's concrete operations. Then kids are able to do even more mental operations that are just at a higher level. They can do kinds of hierarchical classifications and more sophisticated reasoning. But not as sophisticated as formal operations. In formal operations, that's age 11 all the way through adulthood. That is very abstract, logical type thinking. This is why it's important to start teaching sort of abstract math concepts at this stage, because this is when kids are able to understand, say, algebra, for instance. This is a good time to start teaching algebra. You can learn more about the in-depth of these stages in the textbook. It goes into much more depth than we'll go into today. All right, let's talk Bronfenbrenner. So this is Urie Bronfenbrenner, and his theory is an ecological perspective. And so this means that he's looking at the world sort of with multi-layers. He believed development had to do with contexts, and the context the child was raised in really determined how their developmental trajectory would play out. So he really believed in that interaction between children and the settings where they live. And he was actually involved in initiating the Head Start program in the 1960s. So he was one of the experts brought on board to talk about, hey, we need an early program for low-income children, and how are we going to do it? Who should we include? What sorts of characteristics should it have? And since Urie Bronfenbrenner was an expert in child development, they brought him on board to help build that model of Head Start. And if you haven't heard of Head Start, it is an early childhood program that is income-based, that was initially developed to benefit children in cities who were from impoverished families. And they wanted to sort of think about the context that kids lived in, and that's why Head Start always includes a parent education and home visits. This is, let me make the window move up a little bit here. Oopsie daisy. This is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. So Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model is sort of a series of rings with the child in the center. And the child is its microsystem. And surrounding the child are the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem. Some models include the chronosystem, but I'm not including the chronosystem here. So the microsystem is the child. The mesosystem is everything with the child in its environment that it comes in direct contact with. So that might be its family members, the playground where he or she goes to, the religious institutions they belong to, the school, those kinds of things, where the child has direct contact. So you can see how when a child goes to a child care center, that has a direct impact in their development. The teachers who are there, the toys that are available, the safety of the center, all those things impact the child's development. Then moving out to the exosystem, think about the media or social welfare services. The media might influence what kinds of things happen at the school, what kinds of trends in education the teachers are teaching. And maybe the media doesn't directly impact the kid, but it impacts the opinions and beliefs of the teachers. And so then the teachers teach based on, what they've seen in the media. Maybe a better example of this is taking a look at social welfare services. Now, children probably don't go into community resource centers and say, hello, I would like some social services. Their parents probably do. But when parents sign up for social services, that provides them with the healthcare services, that provides them with the doctor that does come into direct contact with the child. And then moving one more step out, like the macro system, that represents the attitudes and ideologies of the culture. And so thinking about what sorts of attitudes and ideologies we have in our culture in the United States, one example might be that we have limited access to free health care. Everybody knows that in the United States, healthcare is very expensive, and public health care is not for everybody. Not everybody qualifies. You have to meet certain qualifications to get it. And that sort of is a reflection on what we believe as a country, or at least what the majority of people believe enough to make the decision for it. And so those attitudes and ideologies impact the social welfare services, which impact the healthcare services, which impact the child's health. So you can see that the attitudes and ideologies of the culture is not something the kid comes in direct contact with, but through all these other layers of systems, it does impact the child. And all these little arrows on the circles represent sort of interactions between the different areas. All right, so that's Bronfenbrenner, and that's the bioecological model. The last one we're going to talk about today is Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky was also a cognitive theorist, but he also believed in social interactions. And so he thought that social interaction and cognitive development really go hand in hand, that you needed social interactions to develop cognitively. So he also wanted to consider the child in the context of the other human beings. And so he's got two important terms, and I'll put them here on the screen, and if you want to take more time on them, you feel free to pause the video. So the first one is the zone of proximal development. This is the difference or distance between what a child can do on their own and what they can do with somebody who's called a more experienced or more knowledgeable other. That's usually a parent or a peer. And the assistance that more knowledgeable other gives is called scaffolding. And the scaffolding is sort of the assistance that you give that changes as a child's competencies increase. So I'll give you an example of this. When my niece Flora was learning how to ride a bicycle, we gave her a lot of assistance because she was just starting out. So we put training wheels on, and I held onto the handlebars, and I helped her turn corners. I even put her foot on the pedal to help her sort of push the pedal down and get the feel of what it feels like to push the pedal down. That was like a high scaffolded area for her. Later, months passed, and later on, she got pretty good at riding a bike. And so after she got good at riding a bike, maybe the type of scaffolding that I would give her would be just verbal. I might just say, put on the brakes, Flora, there's a street coming up, or make sure to turn right here by turning the handlebars with your hands. Or slow down a little so that you can turn properly. And she still got scaffolding, but it was much less scaffolding. So that's kind of how the scaffolding works. Here's another way of looking at it, which is a Venn diagram. Sometimes this helps by understanding the zone of proximal development through a picture. And what's going on here is this yellow bubble are the tasks that a child cannot do at all. And the blue bubble are the things that they can totally do by themselves, no help at all. And what we're trying to do in the zone of proximal development is sort of keep learning in between those two and scaffold it. So it's basically the idea is keeping kids challenged and not keeping kids bored. And I've put in a pretty cool video in the module about this in case you want to learn more or see this in video form. I think it's really helpful to understand this concept. And it's a good concept for us as educators to know. All right, that is where I'm leaving it today, ladies and gents. enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for learning about theorists with me today, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and reading your theorist papers. Have a good day. Bye-bye.